Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is the 22nd of December. It is Sunday, 2019. That means it's Solid Gold Sunday as well as a recap of Saturday Night Silver with Smaulgld. Tonight I want to talk about, it's a topic that comes up all the time and it's very popular amongst gold and silver proponents as well as crypto proponents. It is the death of the dollar and the impact that it's going to have on those assets. And one of the big pumps is that there's going to be a dollar collapse. The dollar is unsustainable. And if you hold gold and silver or cryptocurrencies, tonight we're going to focus just on gold and silver, that you will be protected from what's coming and everything will be fine just as long as you have gold and silver. And probably nothing can be further than the truth than that. And I'm going to explain why. And it's something that it's taken as a given that there's going to be a dollar collapse and that's going to set gold and silver skyrocketing. And you hear on all these pumper channels that in the past, when you have hyperinflation, if you had gold or silver, you hear in Mike Baloney saying you can buy a house with 2 silver coins or things like that. I think he said 200 silver eagles. And they give past instances of when there has been these types of currency collapses where people rush into the metals and everything is fine for those that are protecting themselves. But there's a flaw in all this, and we're going to go through it. So first of all, you can point to Venezuela, you can point to Weimar Republic, Germany, and you can say, look, those are places where you had a currency collapse. The currencies themselves became what you would say worth less, meaning having no value at all, not worth less than before, but actually of no value whatsoever. Pictures of people with wheelbarrows worth of useless dollar or marks or bolivars, whatever they are, and they can't buy anything. But your purchasing power would have been retained if you had kept your savings in gold and silver. And that's true today. If you had held gold or silver or cryptocurrencies in Venezuela or Argentina, any of the countries that have these currencies that really depreciate on a daily basis and they have massive inflation, yes, you would be obviously better off. And we talk about this all the time when we show the charts on gold and silver priced in foreign currencies. And historically, easily in the last 20 years, gold has outperformed just about every currency every year other than the dollar. And there's a reason for that, because the dollar is different than all the other currencies. Now, what people do is they point to the fact that the dollar is subject to a number of weakening influences. One, they point to the fact that the rest of the world hates it and they're trying to de-dollarize. We're going to talk about that in a second. Another one is that the United States has unsustainable debt. That is true. And that the United States Federal Reserve essentially just prints money at will whenever it wants to. That is also true. That doesn't mean that the dollar is going to collapse. So the point of this analysis is twofold. One, probably the dollar is not going to collapse. And two, if it did collapse, it would be unlike a collapse of the Venezuelan bolivar. And you would not be better off if you held gold or silver. Let's just first talk about the possibility of a dollar collapse. Now, everyone says it's inevitable, mathematical certainty. Well, that's true with just about anything that is organic. You, with mathematical certainty, are going to die. It may be inevitable, but it's not necessarily imminent. It's the same thing we've been hearing since at least 1971. The dollar was going to collapse when they went off the gold standard. We had Ron Paul in 1982 in the Gold Commission writing the days of dollar hegemony, end of dollar hegemony. All that was going to happen soon. It was inevitable. And we heard him in the 2000s saying the same thing. And it hasn't happened. And there's reasons why. First of all, the dollar is not just, see, a lot of the people who say the dollar is going to collapse point to the fact they think that the dollar's hegemony is based on the fact that Saudi Arabia prices its oil in dollars and only accepts dollars for oil. and therefore that underpins the dollar. And once Saudi Arabia accepts yuan or some other nonsense story, then it's game over, lights out for the dollar. Well, that's not true for a number of reasons, because there are other reasons that countries and market participants hold dollars. It's not just because they have dollars so that they can buy oil. Second of all, that is an old story, because back when the petrodollar arrangements were put into place, that was a way of keeping Europeans, who were pretty much the only other financial power at the time, to buy into keeping the dollar as a reserve currency, because prior to 1971, from 1944 to 1971, European central banks, signatories to the Bretton Woods agreements of 1944, could bring their dollars that they held, to the United States Treasury and exchange them for gold for $35 an ounce. When Nixon ripped up that agreement on TV in 1971, the Europeans said, well, okay, what's the point of using the dollar? We can just use, at the time, there was no European Union. They could use francs, Deutschmarks, lira, pounds. There was no real need to use the dollar. But the United States put into place the petrodollar agreements with Kissinger, and Nixon negotiated those. And they said to Saudi Arabia, you price your oil in dollars and only accept dollars, and we'll protect you and we'll sell you arms and so on. And that did create a immediate need for the European central banks, European countries, to continue to hold dollars as reserves. But since then, so much has changed. The dollar has taken on a life of its own with funding. You have the emerging markets, including China, borrowing money in dollars. The dollar is still kept as a reserve asset, not just to buy oil with, but even if that was the only reason that any country ever held dollars was to buy oil, Saudi Arabia is no longer the world's largest oil producer or exporter. That's the United States. So there is still need to hold dollars to buy oil, because Saudi Arabia still has that arrangement with the United States. And if you want to buy oil or other energy products from the United States, you're going to need dollars too. But the dollar is much more entrenched than just its need as a currency to conduct energy transactions from Saudi Arabia and the United States. It's also needed pretty much for any other transaction around the world, locally and internationally. And if you think about your own transactions, your own life, as much as you may think that you are a proponent of sound money and you have all your assets in gold or silver, or some people think cryptocurrencies are hard assets, how did you acquire those assets? You worked for dollars and you paid for those assets in dollars, and you complain about the price in dollars. And that's just how things are. And for people who don't own precious metals, they conduct all their transactions without ever even thinking about hard assets, gold or silver. Now you can say, well, they're misguided, they don't know any better, and when the collapse happens, they're all going to rush to gold and silver. That's just fantasy that you hear on pumper channels, because right now there is not even the means of distribution for gold and silver to be held by the masses. Was everyone going to call up SD bullion and buy silver eagles? No, there's not even the production capacity right now for gold and silver coinage. It's not what people think of. Even people who buy gold and silver coins today, they're not looking to spend them. They're looking to hold them as a financial asset priced in dollars. And many of the gold and silver investors aren't holding it in physical form anyway. They hold it in a tradable ETF, and that's because they want the fiat profit, the dollar profits. So the dollar right now is more entrenched today than it was 10 years ago at the start of the financial crisis. Now, the talk of end of dollar hegemony began again. It had gone away after the Gold Commission was rejected, the Reagan Gold Commission, in 1982, because the economy came around again. Volcker, who recently died, was the Fed chair, ratcheted interest rates up to 18-19%. The dollar had a resurgence in the 80s, and people forgot about backing it with gold. Then the United States went on spending, binge spending on the welfare warfare state, increasing spending, increasing the deficits every year into the 2000s. And that didn't really seem to bother people. It bothered people, but the dollar held strong. When the financial crisis hit, the Federal Reserve in 2008 and 2009 began to do what was unprecedented, which was just printing the money, as Mario Draghi would say, in order to alleviate the financial crisis. They printed $4 trillion over the course of the next 4 or 5 years to do what was called quantitative easing, in which they would buy distressed financial assets from the too big to fail banks to prevent them from going out of business, because they would not meet their capital adequacy or capital requirements because they were holding mortgage-backed securities, which had essentially been marked down 60, 70, 80, 90%, and the Fed paid full dollar for them. Where they get the money, they printed it up. The Fed also, during that time period of quantitative easing, just purchased newly minted U.S. Treasuries out of thin air, and that, of course, really annoyed the foreign creditors who had also purchased U.S. Treasuries, like China and Japan and other European nations, but they paid money that they had earned for those treasuries, whereas the Fed just printed up money and purchased U.S. Treasuries. So obviously, this looked like the United States was abusing its position as the world's reserve currency, and they were. And had the United States Fed continued along those lines, well, the rest of the world might have smartened up and might have changed things, but they didn't. What they did was they joined the debt party. And this is where I think a lot of this dollar collapse story continues to this day, and they haven't reevaluated what's happened since then. Starting in 2009 and 2010 and the preceding, the following 10 years, all the central banks did exactly what the United States Fed did. When the U.S. quit its quantitative easing after a few years, Europe started its up and is now actually has a larger quantitative easing program than the Fed does. Now, this isn't two wrongs make a right or what about, but it is pretty much what aboutism, because if the euro, which right now is it is probably the strongest alternative to the dollar, is doing exactly what weakens the dollar, i.e. quantitative easing. And they're not just buying, they're buying government bonds, and their economy is worse than the United States. But what about China? China is supposedly the key to the multipolar world and end of dollar hegemony. Well, they've printed up more money in the last 5-7 years than all central banks put together. And their entire economy runs on issuing dollar-denominated debt. They have state-owned banks that lend money to state-owned enterprises in dollars. That creates demand for dollars. People don't understand that. All the debt that's out there, yes, it is unsustainable, but it's all mostly payable in dollars. That creates demand for dollars. Other currencies don't have that luxury. People don't want to borrow in yuan or any, and they don't hold those other currencies in reserves. The dollar is still, for central banks, what they hold. They hold gold, they hold dollars, then they hold euros, then they hold maybe some Japanese yen, maybe they hold some Swiss francs, some Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, and finally they might. There's only 1 or 2% of global reserves are held in Chinese yuan. So you can forget the yuan as some type of international currency, some type of challenge to the dollar. Now, without going into more reasons why the dollar, and so since 2009, the dollar index is stronger today than it was in 2009, even though the U.S. debt is more than doubled from 9 trillion to 20 trillion, plus the unfunded liabilities, 150 to 300 trillion, in part because the rest of the world owes even more money and has even less ability to print it to pay it back. And in fact, if they did print it to pay it back, they'd have to print it to buy dollars to pay back their debts that they borrowed in dollars. That puts the dollar in the driver's seat. Now, it sounds counterproductive or counterintuitive that the dollar is that strong, but that is why the dollar is that strong. You say, well, what about gold? What about silver? What about Bitcoin? What about them? They are held by a tiny portion of people. They are not liquid in the same way that the dollar is. You can't walk into any store anywhere in the world, or at least anywhere in the northern hemisphere, and use gold, silver, or even cryptocurrencies. You can do that with dollars, though. All right. Now let's get into why a dollar collapse would not be like the collapse of the Weimar Republic or the collapse of the Venezuelan Bolivar. When those currencies collapsed, they were not underpinning the entire global economy. So, okay, Germany is having hyperinflation, but the United States is having the roaring 20s. The United States is doing fine. Goods and services are being produced around the world. It's just that Germany is stuck in a funk because Germany has its own problems. Germany tried to print its way out of reparations from World War I. Venezuela. Right now, the world economy is operating. I don't want to get into whether it's growing at a certain pace or not a certain pace. It's almost impossible to determine global GDP. But the way they calculate it, there is growth in the world, and we do see goods and services being produced in the world. Many of you have jobs, and many of you eat every night, and many of you live in homes and you have the lights on. We don't want to go any past that about wealth or not, but that is not a common occurrence in Venezuela because Venezuela has a lot of problems because their currency collapsed. But Venezuela is just one isolated portion of the world that is a localized phenomenon. It is not a global phenomenon. If there were to be a dollar collapse, which some gold and silver and Bitcoin people think is inevitable and they even cheer it on, what they don't realize is there's nowhere to run to. You can say, oh, they're going to run into gold and silver. They're going to run into... No, they won't. Why won't they? Because it is not a alternative. It is not a vast alternative. It cannot happen immediately. So if you have a dollar collapse, the goods and services around the world would cease to be. Everyone, not everyone, but the vast majority of goods and services in the world flow because people accept the dollar. Now, the dollar can depreciate, and the Fed tries to depreciate. It can depreciate 2, 3, 4% a year. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be a medium exchange. So people also say, well, the dollar's lost 98% of its value since 1913. Okay, but that's not the right way to look at it because they say the same thing. It's depreciated against gold. It's depreciated against Bitcoin. Yeah, and the dollar's depreciated against Amazon stock and Netflix stock. That's irrelevant. What the dollar actually is not a store of value. Janet Yellen has said as such. It is not a store of value. What the dollar is it's a payment currency. It's a reserve currency. It is one in which the world accepts, whether at the point of a gun or just through custom and just because everyone else does. And you can't really explain it more than that. But that doesn't mean it's supposed to, it's on its way out because it is depreciating. Because you wouldn't have Amazon, Bitcoin, the purchase of gold and silver unless there were dollars for which to purchase those. And yes, those assets, those stocks may rise against the dollar. That doesn't make the dollar worth less. It just makes those assets worth more priced in dollars. So if you were to have some type of collapse, like a Venezuelan style collapse of the dollar, you wouldn't be rich holding gold or silver. No one would want your gold or silver. No one would know what to do with the gold or silver. You couldn't get people to jump or to do anything for gold or silver or for cryptocurrencies if they're used to their entire payment systems are based on dollars and everyone's used to getting paid dollars. They're just going to want more dollars. Now, you say, well, what about the reset? The reset. Well, who's going to reset? The people that would reset would be the central banks. They're not going to reset into silver or gold. Well, you say, well, we don't need the global economy. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead and try your own barter economy. You could. And who are you going to barter with? Well, your neighbors. Okay, where do you live? Do your neighbors understand that they can do some type of work instead of getting on a train and going into the city? That somehow they're going to be able to provide a service for which you're going to be able to use your gold or silver to buy stuff from them? It's all going to have to be local then. I mean, today's world is not local. Most of the stuff that you consume, the media you're consuming right now, I don't live next door to you. you're getting this online. Now, you can do without this, obviously. In a financial crisis, you don't need to be on the internet listening to somebody talk about the economy. But the other goods and services that you consume, most of them don't come from the guy next door or the person down the road. So even if they would accept gold and silver, you wouldn't have much of an economy, because most of the people that live near you, I don't know where you live, but for most people that are listening, they don't do things that you need to have done. Yeah, maybe someone can cut your lawn, but they're not going to provide food for you. They're not going to be able to generate electricity for you. They're not going to be able to pump gas for you. They're not going to be able to drill oil for you. That's just not how things work. So the idea that if the dollar collapses, then gold and silver will skyrocket in value, but what are you going to buy? Remember, the goods and services are produced not because people are working for gold and silver. They're working for dollars. And if the dollar were to collapse and everyone just stopped working and supply lines stopped, what good would your gold and silver be? Now, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that if there is a depreciation in the dollar and you have negative interest rates, gold and silver should rise versus the dollar, as will other assets. And we've seen that. We've seen real estate rise versus the dollar in dollar terms. We've seen certain stocks rise in dollar terms. That's actually healthy. But the idea that you're wishing for a dollar collapse because somehow that's going to make you rich and you're going to be able to buy a city block with 200 ounces of silver is nonsense. That might happen in Venezuela. That could happen in Weimar, Germany. But a dollar collapse is global, and that's not going to help you one bit. And in fact, it's probably make gold and silver worth less, because what are you going to do with it? If no one wants it, the only reason gold and silver are valuable today is because there is a functioning dollar. It is a depreciating dollar. Gold and silver are seen as hedge against a declining dollar, but not a decline. They're not a hedge against a collapse of the dollar, because a collapse of the dollar would lead to a collapse of the economic system. And if an economic system collapses, there are no goods and services to buy, and you can't be rich no matter what you think the price is. Because if you think the price of gold and silver skyrocket because the dollar collapses, what's the benchmark then if the dollar is gone? Well, now you have an ounce of gold. Okay, what does an ounce of gold buy? I don't know. A couple of raccoons or squirrels that somebody shot down the road that you might be able... Anyway, that's my view on the dollar collapse. I think it's a ridiculous argument when people talk about this dollar collapse, actually cheering it on and thinking that somehow it's inevitable, it's desirable, and they've got their gold and silver or even their Bitcoin, and that's where the world is headed. I'm not sure that that's even a realistic solution. Not solution, but outcome. Let's see what you guys are saying in the comments section here. Max Strong is here, Chuck and Plata, Ken Stinga, everyone's saying... dollar bad, metal's good. I don't disagree that that gold and silver and crypto, whatever it are, or other assets are better than the dollar, but that doesn't mean the dollar has no value. People who value their assets in dollars, by definition, are giving value to the dollar, and that is the benchmark. There is tremendous value in the dollar being a benchmark. There's a tremendous value in that it's universally accepted for whatever reason. No other currency is accepted. Almost all assets. You want to be a millionaire? You're talking about $1 million. All assets are priced in dollars. All right. Chuck and Platt. I've read on silver financial sites, you mean pump or gold sites, that Russia has enough gold to back 90% of the total face value of all rubles. No, that's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Russia has about $110 billion worth of gold. That's what their 1,800 tons of gold are worth. That doesn't back all the ruble. But these sites, it's like to cite stuff. They know you never look it up. And then you think, game changer, Russia to take over the world. The Russian ruble is not desired by any country. No one holds it. No country holds it as a reserve asset. The ruble depreciates. The reason Russia accumulates gold is they mine it. And they know that the ruble, and you would think that the ruble would have a more solid footprint because it is back 22%, or the reserves, 20% of Russia's reserves are gold, but that doesn't seem to help the ruble. I'm selling my metals and going into mutual funds, said Code 3, haha. Well, you know, if you'd done that over the last 10 years, you would have done better in dollar terms. Now, if you're thinking, yeah, but I'm ready for the collapse of the dollar, so that's why I got gold and silver. I'm not sure a collapse is going to help anybody get rich. Sean Maloney, will there be inflation, the dollar losing value relative to old goods and services due to QE? Yes, that's definitely true. That's not the same thing as a collapse, though. When the Fed or any country debases its currency, it makes the value of other assets relative to it go higher, including food, goods and services, gold, silver, whatever it is, real estate. But that doesn't mean it's a collapse. Now, you can debase a currency to the point of collapse. That could be the German Deutschmark, that could be the Venezuelan Bolivar, the Hungarian forint. But if it happens to the reason it doesn't happen to the dollar is there's such global demand for the dollar, because all the other countries borrow money in dollars, and then they have to. There's a dollar shortage right now. I know it sounds odd. You would say, who would want the dollar? Well, you want the dollar because everyone else owes the dollar. Everybody has to pay dollars, and that's why the United States gets away with its budget deficits. Other countries can't do that. Well, you say, well, that's immoral. That's okay, but that's the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing I can do about it. All right. I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. If I don't get back to you before Christmas, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I'll probably be back before New Year. And I want to thank everyone. So we should see you hopefully by the end of the year. Thank you very much. Have a good night.